Right then, history buffs and aviation fans, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the heart of World War II's naval warfare, exploring the planes that truly ruled the waves. Forget your massive battleships for a moment, because the real king of the high seas was the aircraft carrier, and its crown jewels were the incredible machines that flew from its decks. We're diving headfirst into one of my favorite topics, Second World War naval aviation. Specifically, we're going to settle, or at least fiercely debate, a question that's launched 1,000 social media arguments. Which carrier-based aircraft was the best in its role during World War II? Now, before we get started, a quick disclaimer. Best is a subjective term, right? We're going to be looking at a combination of factors: speed, maneuverability, armament, survivability, and crucially, its impact on the war. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Jaxom Talks channel. So we're only focusing on the nations that actually had operational aircraft carriers and used these planes in carrier operations. That means primarily the US, Japan, and Great Britain. Let's kick things off with the dogfighters. The carrier fighter, the guardian of the fleet, the interceptor, the ultimate airborne brawler. The Second World War saw some truly iconic designs take to the skies from carrier decks. First up, representing the Imperial Japanese Navy, we have the legendary Mitsubishi A6M0. When it first appeared, the Zero was an absolute revelation, incredibly light, with phenomenal maneuverability and a fantastic range. In fact, it dominated the early Pacific air battles. American pilots, particularly in their heavier F4F Wildcats, often found themselves outmaneuvered. It packed a punch with its 20mm cannons, which were pretty devastating. But the Zero had a major Achilles heel, a lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. It was incredibly fragile, and as the war progressed, these weaknesses became more apparent. Then, for the US Navy, they had a progression of incredible machines. Initially, the Grumman F4F Wildcat. Now, the Wildcat was slower and less agile than the Zero. However, it was rugged, could take a pounding, and thanks to tactics like the thatch weave, American pilots learned to leverage its strengths. It was a tough and dependable workhorse that held its own against the Zero in the early days. But then came the game changer, the Grumman F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat was designed specifically to counter the Zero. It was faster, could dive more effectively, and was heavily armed with 6 50 caliber machine guns. Crucially, it retained Grumman's famous ironworks survivability, with armor and self-sealing tanks. The Hellcat pilots racked up an astonishing kill-to-loss ratio against Japanese aircraft. It was truly the aircraft that turned the tide in the Pacific Air War. Of course, we can't talk about carrier fighters without mentioning another icon, the F4U Corsair. Just look at it. With that distinctive inverted gull wing, it's probably one of the most recognizable aircraft of the entire war. The Corsair was an absolute monster. It was fitted with a massive engine, making it one of the fastest fighters of its time. Initially, though, it had some teething problems. Its long nose made carrier landing a little bit tricky, to say the least. So, for a while, the US Marines used it with great success from land bases. Eventually, the landing issues were sorted out, and the Corsair, or the Whistling Death as the Japanese reportedly called it, proved to be a phenomenal fighter-bomber from carrier decks as well. Now let's not forget the British. The Ferry Fulmar was an early two-seater fighter, but perhaps the most potent British carrier fighter that saw significant action was the Supermarine Seafire, a naval version of the Spitfire. The Seafire was fast and incredibly agile, inheriting all the legendary dogfighting prowess of the Spitfire. However, navalizing it had some problems. Its narrow undercarriage made carrier landings tricky, and its short range was often a limiting factor in long-range naval operations. It was a superb pure fighter, but sometimes less suited to the specific demands of carrier life. So, who wins the fighter crown? For early war dominance, the Zero is hard to beat. For sheer raw dogfighting ability, the Seafire, my personal favorite, has a strong claim. But considering its combat effectiveness, its robustness, and its utterly decisive impact on the war, my pick for the best carrier fighter is the F6F Hellcat. It was perfectly designed for the job at hand. Next up, the dive bomber. These aircraft were the precision instruments of naval warfare, designed to deliver bombs with pinpoint accuracy on enemy ships. A successful dive bomber attack could cripple or sink a capital ship with just a few well-placed bombs. From the US Navy, the undisputed king of the early war dive bombers was the Douglas SBD Dauntless. The Dauntless was slower than contemporary fighters, but it was incredibly robust, reliable, and most importantly, highly accurate. Its pilots delivered the decisive blows at the Battle of Midway, sinking 4 of the Japanese carriers. Changing the course of the war, its distinctive perforated dive flaps gave it excellent dive control. It was a workhorse, a survivor, and an absolute game changer. Later in the war, the Dauntless was supplemented and eventually replaced by the Curtiss SB2C Helldiver. The Helldiver was faster, carried a larger bomb load, and had more powerful engines. However, it was notoriously difficult to handle and initially suffered from numerous mechanical issues, earning it unflattering nicknames like Beast and Son of a Bitch, second class. While it eventually became more reliable and contributed significantly to later war operations, its early struggles made it a less beloved aircraft than the dependable Dauntless. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, the primary dive bomber was the HED-3 Val. The Val was a surprisingly effective aircraft, particularly in the early war. It was accurate and played a key role in attacks like Pearl Harbor and the sinking of British warships Prince of Wales and Repulse. Like the Zero, it had the same armor and fuel tank problems. This made it vulnerable as Allied fighter protection improved. The British also had their dive bombers, with the Blackburn Skua being an early example. It had the distinction of being the first aircraft to sink a major warship with a dive bomb. However, its performance was quickly eclipsed. A later and more effective type was the Ferry Barracuda. The Barracuda was unique with its high wing design and carried a significant bomb load. It saw action in the European and Mediterranean theaters, particularly against the German battleship Tirpitz, not as famous as the Pacific counterparts. It was a very capable aircraft in its own right. So, who takes the dive bomber honors? Despite the Helldiver's later capabilities, the sheer impact and reliability of the SBD Dauntless at critical moments in the war, particularly midway, make it my choice for the best dive bomber. It proved that accuracy and reliability trumped raw speed and bomb load in many scenarios. Finally, we come to the torpedo bomber. These were the heavy hitters that were designed to deliver devastating torpedo attacks that could cripple or sink even the most heavily armored warships. It was a perilous job, flying low and slow into a storm of anti-aircraft fire. For the US Navy, the Grumman TBF Avenger stands out. The Avenger was a robust, three-man aircraft capable of carrying a full-size aerial torpedo in its internal bomb bay or a significant bomb load. It was well armored, had self-sealing fuel tanks, and was a stable bombing platform. It had limited success in the Battle of Midway. But it went on to become the quintessential Allied torpedo bomber, proving to be highly effective throughout the Pacific War and even into the Atlantic against U-boats. It was versatile and highly dependable. The Imperial Japanese Navy's primary torpedo bomber was the Nakajima B-5N Kate. The Kate was an excellent aircraft in the early war, arguably the best torpedo bomber in the world at the time. It was fast for its type, stable and accurate. It played a crucial role in attacks like Pearl Harbor and the sinking of the Prince of Wales and Repulse. However, like other early Japanese aircraft, it suffered from a lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, making it increasingly vulnerable as Allied air superiority grew. And for the Royal Navy, the legendary Fairey Swordfish. Yes, a biplane. The Swordfish was already considered anachronistic at the start of the war, yet it achieved some of the most spectacular successes. Slow, fabric-covered, and seemingly obsolete, it delivered the crippling torpedo hits that led to the sinking of the Bismarck and played a vital role in attacks on the Italian fleet at Taranto. Being a biplane, it had very low speed compared to other planes of its time. This did, however, make it difficult for some anti-aircraft guns to track, and its incredible durability meant it would often take a beating and still get home. A later, more modern British torpedo bomber was the Ferry Barracuda, which we also mentioned as a dive bomber. It was a more conventional monoplane, but the Swordfish remains the icon. So, who's the best torpedo bomber? The Kate was superb early on, and the Swordfish achieved incredible feats against all odds. But for its blend of performance, versatility, survivability, and its consistent, long-term effectiveness throughout the war, I have to give it to the TBF or TBM Avenger. It was a powerhouse that truly embodied the spirit of naval aviation. Phew, that's a lot of incredible aircraft. We've talked about the Hellcat, the Dauntless, and the Avenger. Each of these planes, and indeed all the aircraft we discussed today, were vital pieces of the puzzle that ultimately led to victory. Their crews faced incredible dangers and performed heroic feats. So there you have it, my picks for the best carrier-based fighter, dive bomber, and torpedo bomber of World War II. But I want to hear your opinions. Do you agree with my choices? What are your favorite carrier-based aircraft in these categories? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future Jaxom Talks episodes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.